experience with his presentation titled Sounds of the Sea.
Thank you, Megan. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Good. I am Brian Weinstein. I don't know why they call me an ocean expert, because I'm more of just a hobbyist. I have spent a lot of time working around sea critters and other critters in general. I used to volunteer in an aquarium in St. Louis years ago. Then I moved to the Florida Keys to work at Dolphin Research Center. Did some work with the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary and Save the Manatee Club and a host of other critters. And I'm not going to talk about any of those today. Today, I'm going to talk about sounds of the sea. Has anybody here ever been to the beach and seen the ocean? Yeah? Got to realize I expected a room full of little kids, so pretend. So what are some sounds that you might have heard of in the ocean or at the ocean when you went to the beach?
Seagulls.
Seagulls, sure, they make noise. Any other sounds you might have heard?
Waves.
The waves, sure. The wind, sure, we have some wind in the trees. Maybe out in the corner, the sounds of the boats. The ocean can be a noisy place, right? Well, this is just on the surface at the beach. When you go underwater, that's where all the really cool sounds are. And I'm going to take you now underwater. And we are going to talk about the sounds of the sea. Ooh. Ah. Before we can talk about the sounds of the sea, what is sound? Well, your big kids ought to know that when something makes noise, it sends waves through the air. And those waves reach your ears, and the vibration against your eardrum and your ear bones make the sound in your brain, right? Now, of course, sound travels differently through air than it does water. Do you know sound needs to travel through something? It won't work in a vacuum. That's why there's no sound in outer space. Well, through the air, those sound waves travel at a pretty good clip. Over 700 miles an hour, about over 1,000 feet per second. That's pretty fast, isn't it? Well, underwater, they move 4 times as fast. So in the water, underwater, sound travels much, much more quickly, and it can go much further than it can through the air. And that's important for the critters that live underwater. So how do we measure sound in the water? Kind of the same way you measure sound in the air, with a microphone. Of course, underwater, it's a special microphone designed to go in the water. And you want to know what you call a microphone designed to go in the water?
Waterproof microphone.
A waterproof microphone or a wet microphone. Technically, they're called hydrophones. Hydro meaning water, and it goes in the water, and you can lower it in the water, and you can listen to the sounds. Now, of course, researchers don't use little hydrophones like that. They use big hydrophones that they put in the ocean, usually off of big boats and stuff. And those go deep underwater, and you can listen to the sounds. And when you listen to the sounds, the scientists take the sounds from the hydrophone, and they have equipment where they can actually print it out and give a visual representation of what those sounds look like. And they can measure the sounds, and they can learn to identify the sounds. Do they have cameras underwater? Some people do, yes. And that's even great is when you can match up the camera with the sound so you can actually record what's making the sound along with its sound. Now, you would think that there's been a lot of research for sound underwater, and it's been going on and off for the past couple decades. But when you stop and think, one of the biggest problems people had with learning sounds underwater is they would go scuba diving. Everybody know what scuba diving is? Where you go underwater looking at the fish with a tank of air on your back. Well, the problem is most scuba air tanks, when you breathe out, all the bubbles come up. And you know what else comes up with all those bubbles?
Noise.
Lots of noise. So when you're scuba diving, it's hard to hear the fish. Now recently they came out with some special scuba equipment called rebreathers that don't make those bubbles. And because of the rebreathers, it's a lot easier for divers now to record sounds when they're taking pictures and recording their fish. Now, some of the greatest studies of underwater sounds started in the 1960s. A man named Roger Payne and his partner, Scott McVeigh, decided to record some humpback whale sounds. And this had never really been done before. In fact, in 1970, they released an album of humpback whale sounds. Listen to these humpback whale sounds. Pretty cool, huh? Those whale sounds can travel many miles underwater because they're low frequency and they travel great distances through the water. And those sounds are kind of eerie. Now, of course, it's not just whales, the big whales that make sounds. Their cousins, dolphins, are also known for making sounds. In fact, dolphins make a lot of different sounds. They make whistles and clicks and chirps and squeals and squeaks and grunts and all kinds of sounds. How do you think they make the sounds? Think about it for a moment, because we're going to talk about that. Dolphin sounds. Whoops. Hold on. Wrong button. My finger slipped. All right, let's listen to the whistles, clicks, chirps, squeaks, and stuff of the dolphins. And those are just a small sampling of the sounds that dolphins can make. Pretty cool. Now, it's not just the whales and the dolphins, the marine mammals, that make sounds. Did you know fish were very noisy? This is a fish called a black drum. Wasn't that long ago, I think around 2005, there were a bunch of people living in a town in Florida along the coast, and they heard this strange sound coming from their buildings. They kept calling the builders and the engineers and stuff, trying to figure out what was making the sound. They did some research, and they found out it was actually these guys in the canals making noise, and that noise traveled through the ground and through the foundation of their buildings, enough to keep them awake at night. That was in Cape Coral, Florida. And this is what they heard. They call that a black drum. Does it sound like a drum? A very noisy fish. Okay, so marine mammals like whales and dolphins make sound. Fish make sound. Well, how do they do it? Dolphins and whales, it's a little easy because they breathe air. They have lungs like we do. How do we make sounds? We force the air out of our mouths and through our vocal cords, right? Whales and dolphins also have vocal cord type structures. It looks a little different than ours. And as the air goes through, they can make sounds. But if a whale or a dolphin were deep underwater and it was making sounds out its mouth like we did, what would happen? All the air would come out. Actually, with a whale and dolphin, their mouth isn't even attached to their lungs. They've got something on top of the head that's special. It's like a special nostril. You know what it's called? It's a hole they used to blow through. A blowhole, exactly. So they can make air sounds coming out through their blowholes like we do through our mouths. But if they did that underwater, they'd lose all their air. So whales and dolphins have special air sacs in around their vocal cords that they can use to move air from one sac to another to make the sound. Kind of like if you have air in a balloon and you move it out and you control the muscles the right way. Picture that, different sacs inside by their vocal cords so the air goes from sac to sac, and this way they can make the sounds, but they don't lose the air. Now what about fish? Fish don't have lungs. Sure, some fish can make noise by snapping their mouths, and animals can make noise with their bodies by slapping the water with their tail. In fact, whales and dolphins do a lot of that too. But to really figure out how fish make noise, you have to look inside. Fish have a special organ, a special part of their body called the swim bladder. And it's kind of up here. You see that? That swim bladder gets filled up with gas, and they use that swim bladder to help move up and down in the water for what we call buoyancy in the water, to maintain their position in the water. Well, they also use the gas in that swim bladder to make sounds. That drum you heard, they have special muscles around their swim bladder that contract against the swim bladder. You hear that? Picture that over 600 times per second. That is how many fish make sounds. The muscles contracting against their swim bladder. Now, their swim bladder doesn't really contain air from the outside. A couple fish will go up to the surface and gulp some air for the swim bladder. But a lot of the air, the gas in that swim bladder, actually comes from their blood. The gases that come out of their blood fill up the swim bladder, and they can use their muscles to make noise. In addition to slapping with their bodies and using their swim bladders to make noise, fish have another trick up their sleeve also. Listen to a grunt's swim bladder. Okay. Oop. Grunt, where are you? Now some fish have sacs where they can do this too. Did you ever hear a grunt? If you're fishing and you catch a grunt and take it out of the water, sometimes you hear them making sounds. Put me back in! Now the other way marine creatures make sounds is something called stridulation. Anybody ever hear that word before? Other than my family? Stridulation is when animals make sounds by rubbing parts of their body against other parts of their body. Anybody think of an animal that stridulates?
Cricket.
A cricket, exactly. You know how crickets rub their legs and wings together? Well, their wings mostly. And make noise? That's stridulation. Well, sea critters use stridulation to make sound also. For example, the spiny lobster. Listen. Did you know lobsters make noise? They do. Stridulation, they have special parts of their body in along the base of their antenna, kind of like over here below their eyes, oops, where it moves, and it makes the sounds. Shrimp also make sounds, especially snapping shrimp or pistol shrimp. Notice how they have that large claw? Well, they can snap their claw and make a sound that sounds like that. Can you guys do that? Yeah. It's actually not the sound of their claws clicking that makes that, but they actually create a special vacuum in the water that creates a pressure bubble that makes the sound. But that is what the snapping shrimp sound like. But that's pretty boring, isn't it? Well, guess what? You never just have one snapping shrimp making sounds. You get a whole bunch of them crackling. They are some of the loudest creatures underwater.
They can break a glass aquarium too.
They are powerful enough to break a glass aquarium. This is a ball of little bait fish, little herring type fish, making sounds. They use gas to make their sounds too, right, Barb? Special way of releasing the gas. But why do you think fish make sounds? Why do you think fish make sounds and other critters in the ocean? So they can get away from predators? Excellent answer. Yes, maybe to confuse predators. Big schools of fish like this will often make sounds to communicate with each other so that everybody knows they're part of the tight group. It's like, hey, stick with me. Let's stay together. So that's one reason why fish at school make sounds. Other animals make sounds for other reasons. See this guy over here? He can be found in the waters around here. Listen to the sound he makes. Close your eyes and listen to that sound. Does it sound like any other animal you know of? It sounds a little bit like a frog. In fact, this is a toadfish. And you know why the toadfish makes that sound? To attract Mrs. Toadfish. That is a love call. And when Mr. Toadfish makes that sound, she can't resist. Hey, baby. No, it's just the males in the toadfish, as far as we know, that make the sounds. Now, other animals make other sounds. You guys know what this is, right? Do they make sounds? Well, yes, they do. They make a variety of different sounds. One of the reasons you'll hear a manatee make a sound is if it's a mother manatee, and if it's calling its child over, its baby manatee. They'll make it, oops. I keep hitting the wrong button, forgive me. A mother manatee will make a sound that sounds like this to talk to its baby. And the baby will answer. And they communicate like that to call each other, especially in the dark water where they can't see each other. Now, manatees make some other sounds too. Here's a popular sound that you'll hear a manatee make. Yeah, they make all kinds of sounds. Want to hear that one again? It's one of my favorites. Exactly, they eat grass and plants. So I'm going to play for you some other sounds of fish that kind of sound funky. And again, that's a swim bladder. The Atlantic croaker. This is a cousin of the toadfish. Listen to this guy. He has muscles that move very fast along his swim bladder. See if it even sounds like a fish. Sounds like a foghorn, right? Probably.
They're supposed to be the photo for buttons, but my God.
Sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? They can go on for a long time and very quick muscular thing. And to a female midshipman, that's like, hey baby, come on over. Catfish make sounds too. Now catfish, often the sound isn't coming from their swim bladder, but they also use the stridulation. Their fins, where they join, the bones click. And that's how they can make their sounds. Quiz! Who do you think's making this sound? I'll give you a hint. It's stridulation, it's bones in the face and the head that are making this sound. Any guesses? What do you think of that? Seahorses. Their jaws make that noise by clicking together with bones in their head. Who knew? Well, I did. A sea robin is another beautiful fish that makes a funny sound thanks to its swim bladder. Pretty neat. And all these fish can be found around here. Goodbye, Mr. Sea Robin. Well, same to you. A weak fish, kind of like a spotted sea trout. They're pretty noisy too. A variety of sounds with its swim bladder. And he tastes good too. I want to play a short video for you. It talks a little bit about some undersea research with sounds.
The ocean surface is often calm and peaceful, but the waters below can be full of noise. It is not a quiet place. Off the coast of Massachusetts, in the waters of the Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary, researchers are conducting a noise inventory. This will help them understand the effects of both natural and human-produced noises on marine animals, including the endangered North Atlantic right whale. Marine mammals, such as whales and dolphins, rely on their ears more than their eyes to survive. Sound travels very quickly and over great distances underwater. So marine mammals produce sounds to communicate with each other and to obtain information about their surroundings. In the ocean, natural sounds come from rainfall, breaking waves, wind, and movements on the seafloor like landslides or earthquakes. Human-produced sounds come from a number of sources, such as commercial fishing boats and tankers. Each day, hundreds of boats and tankers pass through the sanctuary headed for Boston or other nearby ports, generating a lot of underwater noise. To determine the impact of all these noises, researchers are using several methods to monitor marine animal behavior. Recording units called pop-ups have been deployed in the waters of the sanctuary. They record sounds 24 hours a day. Pop-ups can detect, locate, and track sounds made by whales and fish. Together with aerial surveys and ship tracking information from the U.S. Coast Guard, researchers can determine where the animals are and how they may be responding to different noises. Some whales are temporarily tagged, so researchers can follow their movements and record the sounds they make as they perform different behaviors. What impact does all this noise have on the behavior of endangered whales? Will it affect their ability to survive and reproduce? Researchers are studying the data to find out. In the meantime, maybe humans can help lower the volume.
That's one of the important reasons that scientists are studying whales and other sounds in the ocean, because it's a pretty noisy place, but we're pretty noisy people. And when we add all that extra noise to the ocean, it confuses many of the animals, and it might not be good for them. So we're trying to do research to figure out how can we, with all our boats and traffic and sonar and everything else, be better neighbors for the creatures that live underwater. One last sound I want to see if you can identify. This is not with a swim bladder. What do you think this is? Any guesses? Anybody? What do you think it is?
A whale.
A whale? Good guess, but wrong. A crab? Could sound a little crab-like. This is the sound made by a walrus. Exactly, huh? Pretty cool. Well, that wraps up my talk. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Oh, thank you. You have a question?
How can a walrus make that sound?
Good question. How can a walrus make that sound? Well, a walrus breathes air like we do, and it has lungs like we do, so it can move the air in its lungs and through parts inside its body near its vocal cords and make those sounds. Any other questions? Well, thank you.